Thanks everybody for coming.
Yes. We'll wait for a minute or so, let everybody pile in, and then we'll get going. Wonderful. Ooh, I see several MFA students and faculty are here. I love it.
Some pals. I'm gonna start crying.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, and I see some alumni. I see Alexis joining us from out in New York. Awesome.
Yeah. And Elena. Hi, Elena.
Awesome. We'll give it one more minute and then we'll get rolling.
Okay.
Okay, it looks like it's kind of stabilized for the moment at around 21. So I'm going to jump into our intro stuff because if people miss that, no big deal. Okay. All right, welcome everybody. You are joining us tonight. We're for one of the MFA program's professional practice series. We are projecting here from Minneapolis College of Art and Design. And I like to start our events with a little land acknowledgement. We are here today. The campus of Minneapolis College of Art and Design is located on Dakota land. And if you're curious about finding and developing your own land acknowledgement, I like to provide this slide so that you can look up the land that you are currently located on and get some really valuable resources from the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture on how to develop a land acknowledgement that is right for your potential needs moving forward. So today, I welcome you all. You're all muted by audio and video today for the duration of this webinar. And if you experience any technical difficulties, you can feel free to email us at av_support@mcad.edu. Also, please feel free to use the chat and the Q&A. We will keep an eye on those for any questions after our wonderful speaker has presented. Also, we're working on a recording for this event, and we will be releasing that at some point in the future. You can find the full professional practices series at our website. And I do want to do some shout outs, some thank yous tonight to all the people who make these wonderful talks possible. Gonzalo Reyes Rodriguez is our visiting full-time faculty member in the MFA program. We have Kylie Van Note, our senior administrative assistant. We have Seth Dahlside, who is our wonderful AV support person. And then we also have Nikki Motocolum, another of our administrative assistants who makes all of this possible. And also a shout out to Pearl, who is with us tonight as AV support as well. So as I mentioned, this is sponsored by the MCAD MFA program. If any of you are curious about the MCAD MFA, visit our website. We are a wonderful community of makers, thinkers, researchers, and creative professionals working in a mentor-based interdisciplinary environment. An extra special shout out is Allegra tonight is one of our mentors. So we're so pleased to have her. Looking ahead for those of you, we are almost at the end of the semester. We have 2 more talks after this one. I'm super excited for April 22nd. One of our amazing alums, Allison Bola, is joining us, and she'll be discussing community-based practices. And then on April 29th, we're joined by Caitlin Warner of Fox Tax to talk a little bit about creatives and taxes. So 2 more exciting topics. And tonight, it is my pleasure to welcome Allegra Lockstead, who was born in Windsor, Ontario, Canada, and raised in Lexington, Kentucky. In 2006, she graduated, after graduating high school, she moved to Minneapolis to pursue her BFA at Minneapolis College of Art and Design. She graduated in 2010 and currently lives and works in Minneapolis as a freelance illustrator, designer, and interdisciplinary artist. So without any further ado, I am going to stop sharing and we'll hand this over to Allegra.
Good.
There you go.
I'm good. I was just saying thank you so much for having me. I'm really appreciative and really excited to be here. And just to kind of kick off the day, I'm going to share a presentation I put together. I'll talk about my practice generally, sort of recently, last 5 years. Then I'll kind of talk about freelancing and scaling up, and sort of like what that looks like to meet those needs. And then I also have some information about general trajectory. I know a lot of people are recent graduates, so I have some information on that too. It'll kind of be a choose your own adventure sort of thing. I've asked Ellen to kind of keep an eye on chats, so feel free to ask questions. And Ellen, feel free to jump in and also ask questions or like relay questions. And then at the end, we're going to have a Q&A. Ellen, please feel free to also stop me when I go too long as well.
I'll keep an eye on the time.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I'll jump in and start screen sharing. Okay, we're here. And here is my presentation. Yay. Okay. So I don't know how to move oh, there we go. Okay. So, hi, I'm Allegra Lockstadt. I'm a freelance illustrator. I do a lot of different works. I do graphic design, murals, editorial illustration, package design, kind of a mix of different things. I'm very interdisciplinary. I'm just gonna first sort of show some of my work. Oop. So I just want to sort of key off my work with this slide. I think I started to really do a lot more freelance illustration probably around 5 years ago, full time. Before I was freelancing, I had like a lot of day jobs, which were awesome, and internships, and then finally just got busy enough and sort of picked up work enough to like keep it going and sustaining. And when I was like sort of like really getting more full time, I was working for a teen girl magazine called Rookie Magazine. And we did a lot of content that focused on young adult women and sort of like a lot of different topics. And that kind of stemmed for me into other sorts of topics. So in illustration, you can sort of like be broken down into, you know, what is your style like? Is it bright? Is it colorful? Is it quirky? Is it serious? And then you can also sort of like work into topics that are kind of specific to the industry. So think of things like finance or, you know, personal narrative or memoir or even mental health. So it's like kind of like thinking of like how can you be hired and showing art directors and publications like what are your focuses and what are your capabilities, either through technical discipline and style or through subject matter and kind of like your values in your illustration. For me, like when I do work in this content, especially if I'm working with young adults, I try really hard to think about my client's client. So kind of my readers who is looking at this, you know, what kind of like work do I think they would like enjoy seeing, especially with like young adult work. When I was younger, I sort of felt like this work was great to look at. I was kind of thinking of like Nick Magazine or 17, but it was sort of like one type of reader. And I kind of try to think of like a lot of different readers whenever I'm making work for this audience. And I try to also make things very bright, engaging, playful, welcoming, but then also trying to take readers seriously, especially if they're like a younger teen reader. Yeah, so this is just a few other editorial examples, kind of again in different industries. Sort of the top left is about like a tie manufacturing for Donald Trump in China. And then right hand is sort of like a business and wellness section, mental health, and then sports. And then finally like health and wellness and food. And then this is just kind of more recent work. And the last few years have been sort of a little less working in the editorial market. More just because I've just been very fortunate and excited to work with larger brands and bringing their stories to life. But I still like doing editorial work, and just to kind of define editorial work, anything that's like published or kind of paired with text or story. These are two things that I've done this year for editorial, and really like I haven't been that active in that market as of like the last 2 years. So yeah, when I'm doing like editorial work, I try to think about a series and kind of like thinking of like how do these things work together, especially if it's a long form piece. Long form is like sort of this newer type of illustration where it's like very in-depth storytelling or reporting, and then thinking of the visual story and sort of bringing a reader through that experience, which I think is going to be very important in the coming decade and already is. If we're thinking about how often we're using screens, how there's like an emphasis of like, you know, using information, bringing readers along so it's more engaging and exciting. So illustration plays a huge role in that. This was for a piece that had like a header image, and then these like sort of images were kind of shown throughout the work. Yeah. So also as an illustrator, I do work such as this, which is kind of more decorative but still needed, kind of making portraits. I never really thought about this as a work to that you could do as an illustrator, but it's pretty great. Like most publications like want a consistent look, and illustration is just a really great thing for that, especially if you have like different kind of, I guess, people to feature in different locations and want like a consistent look through a publication. So these are some portraits I've done the last 10 years. Yeah, so I'll just kind of talk really quickly about like how I approach my work and how I sort of think about like freelance and like using different disciplines. Um, so typically for me, like when I work with a client and if their budget's smaller, I will still try to like figure out how to make it work while also not like killing myself in the process. So for example, the City Pages, this is a local publication, rest in peace, unfortunately folded this past year with the pandemic, but like they used to do this fall arts issue where they were sort of showcasing events around the city. And they wanted to kind of like break it throughout the issue into different types of events. So like dance events, art events, music events. So we have the cover on the left, and then like I retooled parts of the illustration to represent each of these events. So it was more decorative and like really playful and fun, but also a very like easy way to kind of maximize this illustration in this context. And at the same time, like respecting my time. I wasn't going to like make brand new illustrations, like the budget and my time frame just didn't allow for it. So thinking of solutions that like work in this scale. Finally, I also really like to think about flexibility in artwork, especially if like the event is meaningful, and like if it represents something that means a lot to me. So this is for an event that Pollen Midwest does. And Pollen is an awesome organization in Minneapolis. It is a nonprofit that does a lot of events and connecting communities and telling stories and amplifying others. They're just like a huge resource kind of platform and hub. And they do this event. This is, of course, pre-pandemic. This has not happened in the pandemic. They're very safe and mindful. Their offices have been closed, no events. So they do this event that's called Work Redux, and it's about women in the workplace, understanding gender, thinking of it in that way. And I was initially asked to make this top left image. And with Pollen, like we reached an agreement to like have like an open-ended license that they can keep using it. And in exchange, like Pollen has been so good. They like mention my name at every event. They retool it. They always have a credit. It's an agreement that's really mutual. Like it has gotten me work. And not only that, has aligned me with something that's really meaningful to me, like women empowerment and having these like very honest and vulnerable conversations. So yeah, just really big shout out to Pollen. They're also really great in terms of kind of illustration and design and thinking of like how to hire illustrators. They also have a studio too. So I would just recommend checking them out. Yeah, and then finally, like kind of going back to like retooling things, I had the pleasure again with working with Pollen this year. And just to kind of also contextualize freelance, like you have long-term relationships. This image I probably made, I think in like 2013. And then this was 2020. So it's like a client and friendship relationship that I've had for like over 5 years. So anyway, like I worked with Pollen and 100% MN, which is a climate change initiative group, and we made this action planner. And yeah, it started as like a mailing voter campaign. So we had these postcards, which are on the left here, and they were sent out ahead of the election, and they were all about getting people on board and voting. And then finally, kind of at the start of the new year, they wanted to this planner, and they asked if they could use this image. So we just figured out ways to like retool it. And basically, as an illustrator, I'm just always hoping to figure out how to maximize these things that I make while like making sure that I'm doing it efficiently and that it's also like agreed upon and like ethical and agreement as well. Yeah, and then this is just kind of like sort of jumping into graphic design. So I consider this to be illustration design. There's like type, there's layout, there's thinking about print, that kind of thing. And this is kind of another jump for this too. This is an event that Sarah Edwards puts together in Minneapolis, and it's basically highlighting a lot of community members, and it's a fashion show as well. And when I work as a graphic designer, like I don't have a formal training in that. Like I didn't do a 4-year program. It took a continuing ed class at MCAD to do this. And then I also just kind of volunteered and experimented. But for me with graphic design, I sort of feel like I start somewhere where I'm comfortable. And that's usually in my illustration practice. So thinking of color, thinking of collage. And that's kind of like, I think this work shows that really well. And this is just more in context. So slides and like sort of graphics for like Facebook, Instagram, that kind of thing, thinking of like an entire identity system. Yeah, and then this is work that I had the pleasure of working with Vadim Gershman. He's a fantastic designer in Minneapolis. He also teaches at Stout University. Yeah, so he reached out to me to help with this mini golf work at the Walker, and I got to do these vector illustrations. And again, it's kind of that same thing of thinking of collage. Like he assembled this with Peter Steineck as well. He did some animation. Yeah, just kind of thinking about it again as like a bunch of different parts and kind of thinking of a common language. And then more work for Rookie. This is that teen girl magazine that I mentioned. We did a partnership with Google and kind of thinking again of like, how do you fit with like a larger brand context and bring another brand together? So we made these like graphics. This was for an event. Made with Code is an initiative that Google does to get young women into development roles and coding roles. So we partnered with them and we did these like fun little animations for Instagram. So I'll talk now, just kind of like, what does it look like to scale up to meet like a larger freelance client? For me, like I showed a lot of kind of graphic design work and illustration work, but like in the last few years, I've been doing a lot more murals and kind of working with larger brands. I'll talk a little about that and share that experience. So I was really fortunate a few years ago to work with Starbucks and Target to make a mural for the downtown Target Starbucks, which is on Nicollet and 8th, I believe. So it's like Target's flagship store. And yeah, it was very great, but it was also really intense because I had never done a mural this big before. Yeah, and then that led to more work with Starbucks. This is a piece in Chicago, Illinois, also for Starbucks. So I'm gonna like talk about like just how I think of these broader client relationships. This is the first time I've actually used this analogy, so we'll see how it goes. But sometimes when I think of working with a bigger brand, I think about these birds called oxpeckers who live on rhinos, and they basically like clean and like sort of are part of like this rhino's ecosystem, and like this giant thing is walking around and there's this tiny bird that's like riding along with it. So I think about it with freelance in kind of this capacity. Like the Rhino is this giant brand that you're part of, like this huge company with many different parts and a lot of different ambitions and values. And then you're a freelancer that's just kind of riding along. So that's me. And then you also have like your art director who's like the direct person that you're working with who works on behalf of the brand. So sometimes they're like, it actually kind of looks like this. And I kind of bring that analogy up because I think a big challenge as an illustrator is figuring out your voice and figuring out how to bring it into a specific context. When you're working with brands or publications or even authors on editorial markets, you're sort of thinking about how do you tell a story together? So it's like, how do I tell a story like with Starbucks? And usually that relationship is like working with an art director or like an editor or something like that. So it still like looks like your work, but it's like sort of with this other client or this larger brand. Yeah, and I feel like for me, like I'm finding that like a lot of this is sort of like a macro micro kind of thing. It's sort of this process of like, I have this small studio practice where I just try to always be making and having things ready or just like experiments. And then that kind of is just sort of like eventually leading to client work. And it's kind of both relationships and then also like, what do you have in your back pocket? What have you done before? So this project in particular, for example, I just did some packaging artwork for Target, and it was a really fun project. I got to work with Ashley Holstein, which is a fantastic designer and art director at Target. And basically, like, I pitched a few ideas for it. They wanted to make like these packaging artworks to match materials that they were doing for this product line. And I had a few ideas in mind, but I pulled from past work. So on the left-hand side is sort of a sketchbook drawing, that wave drawing that I probably did like 3 years ago. And then I kind of updated it for this like sketch. And then sort of like, this is the final artwork. And then finally, this is it on the packaging. And Ashley and her team at Target like kind of puts this together. And I'll just kind of show in a little bit like what this looks like and how I present it to clients. But I think that this is like a good example just to think about that question of that rhino and that little bird. Like, how do you sort of like fit into a brand narrative? Like, who's your audience? Who are you thinking of? Sort of asking like, what is the context, that kind of thing. Yeah, and I thought that this piece that we ended up doing, this is for a paint set for Mondolama, again, same Target brand. Like, I have a bunch of sketchbook work that looks a lot like this, and I'm just sort of doing this in my free time. These are just loose sheets of paper. I kind of do them for warm-ups. I put them in a box. I never look at them again until I need to like come up with an idea for something. And then these are also some other sketchbooks. And then this is kind of where we landed on. And just to sort of talk about how I'm presenting this to a client, this is specific for this Target project. Usually what I'll do is I'll sort of present a kind of research board or mood board that's kind of managing expectations, sort of building a vocabulary between myself and the client to sort of just kind of say like, hey, here's the vibe of what I'm looking for. Here's kind of what I'm thinking. Let me know if this makes sense. This is stuff that we can use to talk about the work moving forward. So this is the board I kind of put together. Yeah, and then this is how I kind of present my sketches. So usually like I'll kind of maybe make some notes and then kind of just show quick options. And like in this group or like this project, I showed like a bunch of different options. And then this is that like sketch I had done already like a few years ago. I was like, yeah, I'll just see if they like this and kind of see what happens from there. More of that. And this is all work I had done already, partly because like this timeline was really short. I did create this sketch just to kind of get a feel for it. So I made this for this project in sketches, but then these I just sort of used pre-existing work. And Ashley also like recommended that, knowing that like it was such a short timeline. Yeah, and then finally, like for every presentation or every design round, I kind of always recap and have this thumbnail reference sheet. Like typically, like I make a PDF and like all these items are in it. And we're actually, if we're using this on like a phone call, like it's kind of like my agenda. So we go through, you know, at the start, like here's the direction, here's these ideas. And then like maybe at the end of the call, we'll land on this and talk about them all together and kind of jump back and forth in the PDF. Yeah, and then this is sort of the next round of that wave piece. And then kind of talking about cropping and placements. Every time I'm like working with a client, I'm just sort of always trying to show them like where I think this is going, just making the information as clear as possible. There's not really a right or wrong way to do this. I think just as long as the information comes across clearly. Yeah, and then again, like a thumbnail reference sheet. Yeah, so going back to this analogy, right? So I think like we can like sort of be like a single freelancer working with a giant brand, but sometimes you bring in a collaborator, so you're riding the rhino together. And this is another example, I think, of scaling up where sometimes it's just needed to fit the work. I'll kind of talk a little about that with my experience. So I had the pleasure with working with Ashley Mary. Ashley is a very interdisciplinary and wonderful artist in Minneapolis. She does a lot of different work. Her aesthetic is like very shape oriented, very fun, very lively. So we've like collaborated together on a few different projects, and it's been a pleasure. She's just fantastic to work with. And then this is more of her work too. We're kind of like combining. And it's interesting. It's that same like rhino little bird analogy to me, sort of like we're both on the rhino, like this giant brand or this giant ask. And like we're both individuals, but we're trying to like go on the same journey, so to speak, but we still have our own needs and our own like sensibilities. I can't stress how great Ashley is to work with and how fun her style is to play with. This is a mural that we ended up doing in August of last year. It was very big, very hard. It's also very hot. And then this is more work I've done with Ashley. So working with Starbucks, we made this long mural in rainbow, this top one, and then these two additional colorways. And when I work with Ashley, we end up like dividing the work a lot. I think when you scale up to and bring somebody along with you, you sort of have to like really meet where each other are coming from. Ashley's like fantastic to work with. She's such a hard worker. She's like so strategic, but she also has like a very different, faster process than I do. Like I'm a slower drawer. So oftentimes when we work together, we try to like always meet on common ground and kind of figure out like both of our values and what we want in the process. Yeah, and then kind of just seeing like how that work can still look like Ashley's and also look like mine too is always really exciting. So I'll kind of just talk about scaling up and freelancing and kind of like thinking of how to protect yourself and support yourself in the process. Or something I like to think about of just the idea of taking people with you when you have an opportunity open. Who can you bring with you? Who can you like help and sort of like see if there's like an interest in growing something together? So I'll kind of like put it in this format, like a solo where you're like the capital A artist, like your name's on the didactic, and kind of thinking of this work in particular. So this is the first mural I did with Starbucks, again for Target downtown. And I'll just share that this was like a really stressful project for me, not from like Starbucks or Target. They have been amazing to work with through and through. I feel very fortunate to work with them, but more just because I was so intimidated. I had never worked with a global brand. I kind of like just felt really, really, really scared. And I think you can scale up by like thinking of this model again, and then thinking of this, like bringing people with you to make the work less scary. Like really asking those questions, like, what do you need to be successful? Like, what do you need to give yourself your best chance? Yeah, and then also having your art director too. So they're going to be your support system as well. So for me with this project, I ended up like assembling groups of people that I knew I needed like support and I needed help. I needed somebody to just tell me it was going to be okay. So I ended up working with like a personal advisory team. These are people I was kind of meeting with pretty regularly. And I just sort of at the start of the project, I was like, hey, like this is an 8-month long project. I would love to meet with you like every month or so just to talk through it. I need like a sounding board. I need support. The first was Cecily Summers. She was my mentor from an internship I had while undergrad. The next is Andres Guzman. He like has done a lot of murals before, and it's kind of cool to think about networks in this case because Andres was probably the first friend I made at MCAD, or one of the first friends I made. And like, you know, I think it was something like 8 years later, I still keep in contact and we get to like work together on something. And then Max Hoagland, who is actually my boyfriend, but also was very great. Like I talked with him a lot on this project. And something that was really helpful that I didn't know was sort of having somebody that I could just like be like, oh yeah, I don't think that's a good idea. Like he threw out a lot of different methodologies and it really helped me figure out like what I wanted and didn't want. And he also has like a fabricating background. So I had to paint this mural on plaster and I didn't really know a lot about that. And then I had to think about sealing it. And he has like sort of like a mixed fabricating background that I could rely on. And then I had this moral support team. So my friends Holly and Meher. And basically this was like, this is what I'm talking about of like people you can bring with you and bring support. I had lunch with 2 people from Starbucks who I'd only met from email, and I was so nervous about doing it. Like they were very kind, they were awesome, but I just like was so nervous. So I remember texting them on the way to that lunch, and I was just like, please send me like 1,000 heart emojis just to make sure it's okay. And they did, and I felt better. So I think even stuff like that. And then finally, like a paint install team. Each of those people I keep in contact with today, Kelly, Andres, Ben, and Greta. And they were great. They helped me paint the mural, which was nerve-wracking at first. Yeah, so just to kind of talk about like scaling up, I think the more you grow, the more you just have to build in systems to help support your scale. For me with this project, it's like, okay, like I have to like make a calendar to keep everybody organized and to keep myself organized and to like interface with the construction design team. So for me, I use Google pretty much for everything because it's free. It's pretty easy to use. It's all browser. It's very, very simple. So this was like a project schedule that I did. And then this was like actually like a very loose like work schedule that I did. And I'll kind of say this, like this is not like a super organized or high tech schedule, but it works. I think like when you're scaling up, like you need to either like develop habits that really work or just like work within your habits already. Like I just need something basic to track hours and payment. So that's like what this served as. It probably could be nicer, worked out fine. Yeah, and then kind of like this is overarching practice. I again use Google for like all my invoices. This has served just my habit and my preference. Plenty of other people do, you know, something like QuickBooks to like kind of keep track of expenses or like other auto invoicing programs or something like that. I just do it like through Google, mostly because I can just immediately save from email and it just integrates quickly. But pretty much like I have a folder for every year. I list the client, I list the project number. And this is kind of what that looks like. I know it's kind of zoomed out. I was trying to like make things a little vague, but I kind of have this like top left corner, the folder. I sort of have the phase in the invoice, the contract, the invoice itself, which I just make in a spreadsheet in Google Drive, and then I export it. Yeah, and then again, like kind of talking about like starting where it's just easiest and in your habits. I also have to track hours with a lot of people I work with. So this is a project I'm doing with an illustrator, Lynn Scurfield, and we like have just been tracking hours in this really quick Google Drive folder. Like it's not fancy, but it works. So I think like maybe what I'm also trying to relay in this is like don't have perfection paralysis around your working habits. Just try stuff out, see what works. It's always okay to change. Like just see what works for you and makes sense for the project. And then I kind of redacted this just in case, because there's confidential information. Kind of with scaling up, you do need to have insurances. And with murals, especially, like most companies will tell you like what you need. And all I did for this was talk to an insurance broker. And kind of going back to staying organized, this is again just in my Google Drive so I can access it easily if a client needs it. And then same with housing, like other documents for every project. Yeah, and then kind of more budget stuff. So again, like I'm just using Drive and like organization systems that work for me. This is just what I found that has worked. Like I do all my taxes in it. It's very lo-fi. I know a lot of other people use like Quicken or QuickBooks, but whatever works for you, that's kind of what I suggest for freelance. And then kind of same too with Pinterest. Like this is just sort of more process. Like I kind of collect things in this way. And then same with like keeping organized for work. So the things I'll just sort of touch on quickly that I would consider for freelance and keeping organized and scaling to meet things is thinking about your overhead costs. Like what does it actually cost to keep you operating? What do you need? Thinking of like specific labor and disciplines, like who do you need to like maybe hire for projects? And then, oh, that's supposed to say experts, but specialized experts. So you might need to at some point scale up to have an accountant or a lawyer, or maybe even like an office manager or an agent, that kind of thing. I know for me, like the first 3 years when I was working as a freelancer, and then I also had like a day job as a server, I didn't need an accountant. I just wasn't making enough freelance miscellaneous income. And then finally, like I got a bigger project. I was like, ooh, I'm gonna need some help figuring out how to like do my taxes. So you can also like get those people kind of as you need them. Yeah, and then again, just reiterating organizational structure, thinking of your habits, like think of like what works best for you. If you're a at-home worker, maybe you work at home. If you need to work outside the house when it's safe and not pandemic time, maybe consider getting an office. If you're like a person who works better at night, do that. Just really thinking about that. Yeah, and then thinking of like how you want to grow too. Like you can also choose to grow at the pace that's like comfortable to you. And then lastly, kind of with all of these things that I was keeping track of, I think you just have to know that nobody is going to keep track of your work for you. You kind of have to do that work. That's part of the freelancing gig, I guess. You can again like hire people out to maybe help you with that, but you have to keep track of everything. And that's like, business expenditures, contracts, records, past work, all those sorts of things. Okay, so I'll just kind of jump into collaborative work. It's sort of the same thing. This again, like thinking of that giant brand and your collaborator. I just kind of wanted to talk about like when does this context make sense to hire somebody on, and like what I kind of think about. I'll talk about this with the project that I mentioned with Ashley Mary. So we worked with Starbucks a few years ago to make a mural for a Starbucks in Madison. And when I got that project, they reached out to me solo and they gave me this as a mood board. And I was like, okay, this doesn't really feel like my work. Like there's colors I really like about it. There's like more figurative elements in this left hand piece, but this like this left hand like pattern piece like doesn't really feel like my work. So I reached out to like Ashley Mary and like we ended up working together based on this. And I think it's important that you can like bring people with you and then also figure out how to make the work more successful. And like she has like the shape vocabulary, so we ended up putting that together. And then this is sort of the final work. We ended up doing like a stairwell mural. This is kind of one photo of it. It was really hard to photograph. This is an upstairs sort of cluster of paintings that we ended up doing together. And then this is a painting that Ashley really took the lead on. And it's just really great to see, like going back to this first side, seeing this like wallpaper on the left, just like swatch and kind of seeing how it all came to life. I couldn't have done this project without her. Like she brought so much to it that I just wouldn't be thinking of aesthetic wise, and then even like process wise. So it was not only just like an amazing fit in terms of aesthetic and color and like vibe, it was also just amazing too, because like this was such a big project. I wouldn't know how to do it alone. Yeah, and then finally, like when I work with anybody, I try to make sure that like there's the agreement that it can always be used in however which way they need. So Ashley, of course, has listed Starbucks on her site. I mean, she's worked with them solo before. It was only a matter of time. She's like so great. Yeah, and I have that too with my freelancers or people who I hire on as painters. I always say like, please like use this as a client for your list too. Please use me as a reference. Everybody matters like when you hire somebody on. And I think that you should always be doing what you can to support your workers. So this was the case with like Ben Curry and Greta. They both listed the Target and Starbucks like on their site, which I was really appreciative and honored to see. Yeah, and then just again, like I think when you work with collaborators, one thing I would also think with like organizing is like thinking of where everybody else is. Like you do need to keep track of projects that are large scale, but I think you also need to figure out like, hey, how does my collaborator work? So right now, for example, I'm working with an illustrator, Lynn Scurfield. She's awesome. Please look her up. And she like is somebody who's like, hey, I don't use Dropbox. I use Google Drive. And it's like, okay, let's use Google Drive. So making decisions like that work. Yeah, and then finally, like keeping track together. So making decisions that are collective of like, how are we going to keep track of our budget? Like what works best for you? This is stuff that I've done for past projects. Again, with Ashley or other people, and just making sure that I have a way of keeping track to match that scale of the project. Yeah, and then again, this is just kind of like typical to just show how my freelance folders look like. So I'm doing some work for Panda Express, and this is kind of like pretty typical like rounds, sort of showing like all, so then I can like find everything pretty easily. And same with Starbucks with past archive projects. I want to be able to find it quickly in case I need something. So I have like sort of this quick freelance journey of how I got started. And Ellen, I'm wondering if we have any questions at this time or if I should just keep going.
Good question. I have not seen anything that we need to pause for. So I say rockets
Okay.
through, go for it.
Okay, thank you. Please feel free to ask questions. We'll also have time at the end, but I'll just go for it. I thought that this would be really great to share. So I feel like I've sort of shared like kind of the last 5 years, but I just kind of want to talk about like, what is it like to actually get started freelancing and what is it like after you graduate? I think that that time is like so confusing and so weird. And no matter if you graduate now during the pandemic, which is super weird. It's even weird on its own when it's like normal times and not pandemic. So I thought I'd just share like the work I was making and kind of talk about like how I came into freelancing. This is sort of like what I was drawing when I was at MCAD. And while I was there, I'd have to also preface, I did not have an illustration training. I went there for a fine art studio with a focus of painting and drawing. I really loved that program. It was really fun and interdisciplinary. It was 2010, so just contextually, the internet was like not what it is now. Like Twitter only had like 50,000 users. Instagram wasn't real. Everybody was using Blogspot or Tumblr, like different time. And I was also making work that was really different, but I was also making these drawings I wasn't really showing in class. I just kind of was making them. And at the time, I was like very interested in like women's fashion and like women gender represented in magazines and sort of like flattening identities from that process. So these are some of those drawings. And like, look at this left-hand drawing. Like I didn't know how to like use Photoshop or like to clean up artwork. It was a different time. Like you could still choose to be like a computer person or not a computer person, which I don't think is really a huge option right now for many students. So this was kind of the work I was making, and I was just sort of doing this in my free time. I had like a lot of like interest in figures and fashion work and kind of like, again, like just thinking of like sort of like sources of images. And while I was doing this, when I graduated, I had an internship that I really loved with my mentor, Cecily Summer. And I realized in that internship that I liked working with clients. I was also working at a restaurant. I had a few different restaurant jobs at the time. So I was kind of making these works and then putting them up on my website, which was a blog spot at the time. Crazy. Who even has heard of that anymore? Probably not a lot of people, but I was doing that, and I was also sharing it on Facebook. And I was sort of making these like sketchbook works. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just kind of like making things that interested me or like practicing drawing. Yeah, this was like a drawing work that I shared while at MCAD. I don't even have very good photos of it too now I'm looking at it. I also did this while at MCAD. This was like with Annie Mock. She was a student as well at MCAD and asked me to do the cover for this anthology. Yeah, and I was just sort of practicing. I did it for free. It was a really great opportunity, really fun. So this was sort of like what I was doing like as I graduated. I had these 2 internships. I didn't really know any of the Adobe Creative Suite, which is kind of like how the design industry works right now. You can certainly do things open source, but I didn't know how to like design anything. I didn't know Illustrator. I kind of knew like just a little bit of Photoshop, but not really. So I had these 2 internships. One was at the Push Institute, which was with my mentor, Cecily Summers. And it was sort of like, kind of like at the time, like TED Talks, like sort of doing conferences, asking these bigger conversations and how distilling them into experiences. And then I also had this internship at a bakery, which is the above work here. And I learned how to do like Illustrator, how to like send things off to a printer, how to do layout, all those things, how to think about like patrons and consumers, that kind of thing. Yeah, and just to talk about Cecily and kind of like what like I think freelance can look like in like relationships. So Cecily was my mentor at Push, and from that experience, like I ended up doing her illustrations for her book, Think Like a Futurist. And it was really fun because I had never really done illustration work at that time. I just knew from working with her at my internship, like I loved working with clients. And I also have to preface too, like Cecily really opened that door up for me. Like she was so helpful and so supportive. And I'll say too, like the one thing that I'll kind of say with like starting a career after school, which is what you're doing. I was doing my internship first, like in my final semester with her. And like I realized like, oh, I don't think I'm in the right major. Like this major in MCAD where I was doing this sort of work was really great and really fun, but it was sort of like at the time geared towards being a studio artist and applying for her, the Jerome Foundation, doing gallery work, which is kind of not really what I wanted. It was very like a solitary studio experience. And working with Cecily like really opened it up to like clients and thinking about it. And then she also kind of opened me up to like other opportunities and thinking about design and getting design experience. And just to kind of talk about like freelancing, I think a huge thing is network. I've known Cecily for now like 10 years and she's family, and I'm so grateful for that. I think like a big thing in career building is just kind of having relationships and kind of knowing that there might be 10 years and you might like end up getting work from those people, or you might end up having like an amazing support structure. It's really cool to think about. Yeah, and then this is more work for Cecily. This is kind of more recently. She does some like work for Google. So we made these like little slides that were kind of talking about like something she was researching. Yeah, and then finally kind of going back to network too and like freelancing. So while I was like kind of in my recent graduate years doing this internship and like doing my other bakery internship, I was also doing like just a lot of volunteer work. I knew I wanted to like practice illustration and practice working with prompts and practice like just the process that I know most illustrators are getting at school. So I had the opportunity to just kind of volunteer wherever I could. This is a magazine called Paper Darts, which is still in action today. It's run by Megan Murphy, who also has worked at Pollen and who's now is a fantastic artist. Please check out her work. And she asked me to illustrate this piece. So this was like kind of one of my first printed pieces. And from there, like Megan eventually ended up being an art director at Pollen. So that's how I kind of got this work. We developed like a work relationship through this kind of volunteer engagement. And then she reached out to me to make this image, which I talked about and showed earlier. And then, of course, it's been used in this way. I think like a big thing with like your recent grad years and just kind of where many students are now about to graduate, you're sitting in a room with your network. Like you might know people for 10 years and you have no idea like where they're going to end up. Some of my first jobs definitely came from my MCAD network, and then some still do. Yeah, so more for Megan, like, so I, did this with her. A few years later, she's working at Pollen, she reached out to this, and then same with this, and then this was also a Pollen project too. So this is sort of like a timeline of like 8 years of knowing Megan, and then getting to like work with her, and it's just been a delight every single time. And then same with Minneapolis Zine, like this is sort of volunteer work that I did. I didn't get paid for this. It was just really cool to like figure out how to do like a prompt and like kind of play with an illustration. I'd never really done that before. Yeah, and then kind of more figurative work. These are sort of some commissions that I ended up doing for a friend. And it's funny, like this friend I now like see pretty frequently too. It's Ben Moore, and he teaches at MCAD. But it's just like, I also didn't know I would be like closer to Ben Moore and like 10 years later, and who knew? Also kind of one of my first pieces. This is like where I learned how to use Photoshop. It was like a poster for a independent film, and it was a referral from like a friend where I also like put out to friends I want to do volunteer work to build my illustration portfolio, and this came from that. Yeah, and then like just to kind of go back to networks, and you never know where people are going to end up. So this was one of my first assignments that was published by a major publication. My friend Dylan Lathrop is a fantastic graphic designer and art director. And one of his first jobs out of school was working at Good Magazine. So he was sort of doing this illustration initiative, and like I was posting all these drawings on, Instagram and not Instagram, but Blogspot and Facebook. And he reached out to see if I wanted to just try doing some illustration work. This was for a piece where it was sort of like the early days, maybe like 2010, 2012 of like crowdsourcing information. So they asked their readers to talk about their dream jobs, and then I illustrated 13 of those jobs. I didn't really know Photoshop at the time. I was just sort of weighing in and figuring out layers and that kind of thing. And this was actually a breakthrough for me, like this bottom left-hand piece, like these two women. Like the prompt was like somebody's dream job was to offer funeral services that were very empathetic or very like high touch. And I remember Dylan being like, just make an Allegra Lockstead illustration. And I was like, I don't know what that is. So I had to like really think about like, what would I do in this situation? Yeah, and like it was also my first experience too of like working with an art director to help through these challenges that I didn't really know how to approach. Like this top right hand piece with the laptop was something about like online platforms and like a dining service. And I couldn't figure out how to do it. And then Dylan was like, why don't we do it this way? Like, I think that makes sense. And it just helped to like know Dylan already. He was like a very sweet at MCAD. We didn't know each other super well, but I knew like we were always kind to one another. He was close friends with my boyfriend. Yeah, and got to like work with him a few times after that. So it kind of turned into a working relationship. This was more work with Dylan, and then more work with him too, like a little while later. And then finally, like he jumped over, like this is both from Good Magazine. And then he worked with Vox and reached out to me to do this piece for The Verge. And this like was very fun. This was kind of like one of my favorite pieces. It's still my portfolio. It's a few years old, but I really, really love it. Yeah, and at the same time, I was doing work for Rookie or starting to, and that was also where I really found a lot of my voice. I had done a lot of informational interviews when I had graduated. So what an informational interview is just reaching out to somebody, asking questions about their workplace or their role. And I reached out to Kelly Ablin, who was a friend of my a friend of a friend, and actually Ben Innes, who was a closer friend of mine's girlfriend. And I was like, yeah, I don't know Kelly very well, but I love the work she's making. I would just love to hear like, what is she doing? Like, what were things that she thought about with like illustration? She also had done like the traditional illustration design program at MCAD. So I could like kind of hear like what she was doing. And like Kelly is actually the one who referred me to Rookie. And it's just one of those things where like, I met with her, I kind of like said like, hey, here's what I'm interested in. What do you think? If you have any ideas, I'd love to like think about them. Whenever I do those informational interviews too, I always like offer to buy coffee, always be thankful for people's time, that kind of thing. Yeah, and then Kelly ended up referring me, which I was not expecting, but it was like that meeting to like build that relationship with her and that friendship, and then getting like a chance to be referred. And then finally, like something else I was doing was just like making work for myself during this period. And I made this for a show that I actually did in collaboration with Paper Darts and Suvac. So again, like working with Megan Murphy, who I mentioned earlier, I kind of did this work just as part of the show. And it was with also my friend Andres, who I mentioned earlier as well. And I was making these works that were just for me, and kind of portfolio building. I didn't really know what I was getting from this. I just knew I wanted to make this. It was like an important piece for me, kind of thinking about adolescence and growing up and like reaching like these like milestones and growing up in relationships and just thinking like, oh, I'm finally here. It's just a romantic thing. Yeah, and I had that in my portfolio and clients saw it and ended up sort of hiring for this specific look. So this was a piece I did for Kentucky for Kentucky. I'm from Kentucky, and this is an organization that does kind of Kentucky merch. So it's the same process, these like flowers, and they're just assembled into like this design. And then kind of more of this too. I sort of have like floral work. I think a lot of like freelance work is just make the work you want to be hired for. So I kind of like was making a lot of floral stuff too. And friends in my network and like sort of sharing that knew I was doing that. So this was a piece I did for Katie Wilson and Scott Grover. They own Crush, which is a store in LA. And we made this like blue rose wallpaper for their store. And it's like a huge part of their brand now, like just the blue rose in general. And huge shout outs to Katie. Like I don't know how to properly make a pattern, and she really helped me through this. Yeah, and then finally, this kind of led to more work. This is much later with Starbucks. Like for this piece, which I showed earlier, they referenced this piece, which I still had in my portfolio. And it was so funny because like the week before I got this email, I was like thinking of taking this down because it's sort of like, oh, it's old. Like maybe I shouldn't have it in there. But then like they reached out and wanted something similar. Yeah, and also during this process, I was working at MCAD Gallery with Carrie Morgan. She's a fantastic gallery director there. Once it's safe to go see shows, I really recommend it. MCAD creates like such a welcoming space for exhibitions. And the show is really great. Carrie and her team are just fantastic, and I had the pleasure of working with her, doing a lot of exhibition design. I'm kind of bringing this up and sort of saying that there's no work wasted. I kind of had this as a day job. It was a fantastic job. I got to work with artists. I got to learn a lot of different things. I got to like be at a place I really loved. And it kind of led to like other projects too that were larger scale. So I learned like a lot about install. And like while I was doing that too, I was also doing like these fashion events with a few friends in town. And I was just doing this with interest. I wasn't really sure like where this was going. I just thought it was a really great community event and thought like the group behind it was very like passionate and exciting. And I think like doing both of these things, like I didn't think they would ever relate to my visual practice, but there was such a huge project management component to both of these roles and thinking about these larger scale things that they now like relate back to my practice. So this was like from a few years ago. I did this exhibition again with Megan Murphy at Public Functionary, which was a gallery in town, and it's kind of transformed into Studio 400. It's a really cool initiative. Anyway, like the show that we were doing at MCAD kind of like related to this. I found like a lot of install know-how really came back into this. And then same with doing events, like these two things that I was doing kind of merged together in this kind of event space, which I think kind of brings it back to Starbucks for me. This is just like such large scale work. I sort of think my freelance career is just kind of an ending. Like I just think that no work wasted is a huge component for me. Like I think everything you're doing is going to like end up leading somewhere for you. And even think about that too with my restaurant job. Like sometimes I get so stressed out. And then I remember like, wait a minute, like I used to have like a cooking line cook job where I had to make like 60 salads in like 10 minutes. Like I can do some of this work that I think is really hard. Like it all relates back. And that job like also taught me things like time management, that kind of thing. Yeah. So it just leads to like all this bigger work and thinking about project management and scale, which I had never predicted. Yeah, last thing I'll kind of say with like sort of a freelance practice and something to kind of keep in mind as you're growing. I think that you should really think about who you can bring with you. And then also thinking about this idea of rising tide raises all ships. Like when you are working as an illustrator, maybe for the first time with somebody who hasn't worked with them, you're providing this like stewardship to your client. And eventually that could look like that client working with more illustrators based on your experience. And that's everything on like knowing rates and like sort of thinking about like how you're representing yourself in that sort of professionalism. And then I've been working with this language, like this Trojan horse model. I think like right now, what I'd like to be doing with my practice is thinking about like, how can I use all that I have as a way to bring people in? How can I use it as a form of empowerment, whether it's somebody I'm working with directly or collaborating with, or whether it's somebody who wants like entry into like a specific industry or working with a client. Trying to do this like by both through the teams I hire and then by referrals as well. So I will kind of jump into like how I find work. Yeah, and I'll just kind of take a minute to pause to see if there are any questions. And how's my time looking to you, Ellen?
You're good, Allegra. We've got two questions that rolled in while you were talking. Can we answer those two? So the first one is from Alexis, and she asks, as someone who is establishing themselves with a more conceptual or fine art practice, who has an interest in freelancing, I'm wondering if you think it is necessary to present freelancing or client-based work separately from conceptual or fine art practice when you share work online. So for example, particularly, should you have 2 websites or 2 social media pages, that kind of thing.
Okay, yeah. Actually, I have a good way of answering this. I'll just kind of show 1 or 2 quick files here. I actually run into that problem a lot. Not really with like fine art, but more of like, how do you position yourself if you do a lot of different things? So let's say you're like a conceptual artist, but then you also have like a fabricating practice. So it's like you can provide that service to people, even though it might be separate from like a conceptual studio practice. I'm kind of thinking about like maybe your main thing to ask or show is like to sort of think about, how can I show a client I can do this? Like, how can I show that context, that like proof of sort of thing? And what I end up doing, I think it's going to be different for everybody. I think that like it's great for sure if you want to have different websites. Like plenty of people I know do that. Like some people have like, you know, illustration, and then other people have like web design, and those two are like completely separate, or same with a graphic design portfolio. I think Melinda Beck has like a really good example of this. She sort of has like, you know, her work and then even different styles. Looking at different interdisciplinary artists having that is really great. I know for me, I'll just show quickly my website. Oop. Yeah, so I know for me, like I just do it all on one page, and then I kind of use these tags to use different things. And then like, of course, like I have it open already, my Instagram, where I'm kind of like using this. And for me, like to kind of answer that question, this is sort of like what I look as like casual lowercase p projects. Like I share very like finished projects that are presented in a certain context, but then I also share like stuff like this. It's just kind of fun. And then these are sort of more particular. And then I have my Twitter, which I share stuff on as well. And this is sort of what I use every day. So I think like you can answer it both by platform, but then also sort of thinking like, yes, you could do different disciplines. Another good example for an artist that does this is Tegan White, for example. She has like her website that's like teganwhite.com. And then she has this children's book in print called Tiny Moth Studios. And they look completely different. She separated it that way. Yeah, so I think I suggest that. For me, what I also end up doing is I end up doing like PDFs. So typically, like I just have these ready. This is something that I will do if like a client reaches out with something particular. Like this past December, I had like Starbucks reach out and they wanted like some specific work to reference to like one of their design centers. So I created this deck where I just say like what the deck is, I date it, and then I show work in this context. So I'm really catering it to like a specific person. So this is some stuff that I did last year for Starbucks. And like this client in particular, they were looking for like foliage that had rainbow stuff in it, which I like doing. So I made like a deck like that was specific for that, and pulled work that was like very like talking to that language. And then like sometimes like this is sort of new for me, and maybe this answers your question a little bit. So I just applied for this residency, and I don't have a place for this on my website yet. I'm still figuring it out, but I have a plein air practice. I'm not sure how it relates to my freelance practice, but I'm still like collecting and kind of thinking about it. So I applied for this residency, and this was actually my application. And, you know, I do like kind of same format cover. I just designed it to like feel like this funny vintage postcard. And then I might like write something. And when I'm doing this, I'm thinking about who the audience is, who's reading this. So kind of showing the process. And I'm not really sure where I'm going to put this on my website. I'm still figuring it out. I think like for this person who asked this question, like you don't need to figure out all at once. Like you might try a bunch of different things, and some things might stick, some things might not stick. It's okay to try different things. But yeah, so I ended up making this. I'm not sure how to really put it on my website just yet. Who knows? But I have shared some of these like on Instagram. I know like another person to look at might be Kelsey King. She is an instructor and illustrator as well. She's at MCAD and does like a bunch of different freelance work, and she has her work organized by category, but she also has been doing landscape paintings and just has like a separate website entirely for it. I heard her talk about it recently, and she was also saying like she's not sure where it's going. So why not try it? I think like putting it in a format that's like this, and then kind of even thinking of like how you could like sort of figure out services might be helpful. And like pricing, like you could even do like price sheets in here. Yeah, and then I end it like this. Yeah, I hope that answers that question. I kind of like have a few different ways of thinking about work and just organizing, and this is just what's worked for me too. Yeah, just kind of having this, and like I just will make something for every single client. So this was like for an actual project proposal, and like kind of like what the project was, and then just some creative direction. And then I put like, this is sort of like proposal based, like putting in costs and like timeline, that kind of thing. So you could even do this for like other services. Like, I don't know if you're like a welder or something and like could like quote things out in a particular way. Yeah. I hope that answers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you've pretty well answered it. And Alexis, if there's some more nuance, feel free to drop it in the chat and we'll pick up those additional questions.
Great.
Oh, good. I see in the Q&A. Thank you, Alexis. Helpful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for asking.
Awesome. Next, we have a question from Bethany, and they ask, thank you for this presentation. This is super interesting. Are most of your clients repeat or new?
Very good question. Yeah, I think like for me, like this whole section where I was sort of talking about relationship building, mine are sort of like relationship based, and then they kind of repeat. So it's like I do have long-term client relationships, like for instance with Paula and Megan Murphy and a few other art directors there. It's like I've been so fortunate to be friends with them for so long and watch and celebrate their growth and that sort of thing. So I met them very early on, like through paper darts. Megan was kind of working on that, and then jumped to Paula, and that's like a like almost 10-year relationship. And that sort of turned into like this repeat. But in that process too, everybody you work with is sort of your best champion and somebody who can refer you. Since then, Megan has like referred me several times, and that's been like sort of new client opportunities. And then vice versa for Megan too. Like she is such a talented illustrator and painter, and I love being able to like work with her. And like during that process, like talk, I would sort of make like a portfolio and like sort of start sending it out to people or talking to other graphic designers to see like, hey, like maybe, you know, you could help me figure out what sector I should be working in, that kind of thing. That was a long way of answering it. I hope that was like pretty clear.
We got a thumbs up from Victoria in the chat, which is great. And then two more questions. Is that okay, Allegra?
Sure. Yeah, I'm gonna land on a prettier side. Go for it.
So the question is, it starts with, thank you for the presentation. I was wondering, exactly. This is from Zachary, and they ask,
one coffee meeting and just telling me like, how's your first year out of school? Like I met with her when I just graduated and she was already like a year out. We were sort of just talking about it in that way. So you want to be doing, and if you want to be doing a lot of different stuff, that's okay. Like I think the thing that I would just sort of think about is like, how can you show that capacity? Like for me, like I know my website, sorry, I keep jumping back and forth, but my website has that. Like I have, you know, murals, illustration design, like I'm showing that capacity. But then I also have those decks that show like other things too that might not be as public, or like right now, like I don't have like a graphic design section on my page, but I have like graphic design work. And if I want to like get more of that work, I would sort of make like a portfolio and like sort of start sending it out to people or talking to other graphic designers to see like, hey, like maybe, you know, you could help me figure out what sector I should be working in, that kind of thing. That was a long way of answering it. I hope that was like pretty clear.
We got a thumbs up from Victoria in the chat, which is great. And then two more questions. Is that okay, Allegra?
Sure. Yeah, I'm gonna land on a prettier side. Go for it.
So the question is, it starts with, thank you for the presentation. I was
thank you back.
wondering, exactly. This is from Zachary, and they ask, I was wondering how many freelance projects do you typically take on at a time?
Yeah, I think that varies. And I think it's also going back to this like that growth question of like how much you want to be doing. And maybe like a big question too, like the sort of framing of like what sort of work do you want to be doing and like kind of income. Like this is something I'll kind of just talk through really quickly. So as a freelancer, I think like to me, I think right now it's important to like have a lot of different skill sets, whether it's like, illustration is your main thing, but then if you need to actually make an income and like, like not that you can't do that from illustration, but like let's say you want to like, be able to like do copywriting or something on the side. I think just like having a lot of different practices helps with that, and like to sort of figure out like asking like what is this work worth. So you can have like a huge like plate full of clients and maybe you're doing a lot of fantastic work, but maybe it's just like you're stretched too thin, and it's kind of like figuring out like what is that worth, like being so busy, like is it like worth making this kind of work, is it like worth having this kind of hustle. So I kind of always think about that with how many clients I take on, and kind of asking these questions. Can you afford not to do it? Like, what's it important? Why is it important to you? And then again, like with how many people you take on, like thinking about like, it's okay to be ambitious, but it might not be like strategically smart to be overtaxed. So these are sort of things that I think about with like managing my workflow. Maybe this will help answer it. I kind of try to decide what to take on based on these kind of things. I try to think of like, what can I do to not resent the work? And to kind of then answer like, how will I not resent the work? I sort of like think about these three categories: fiscal, monetary. Like we live in a commercial world. Everybody has to have a job. It's just kind of our agreement of taking care of ourselves. So that's just something I have to consider. I then think about like, is it something that's like going to help me with my network or maybe help me like explore something? Is it something that like really aligns with my values, that kind of thing? And then finally, like, will I actually enjoy the process? Like sometimes like I take on work that is like lower paying just because there's more creative freedom, or I'm getting to work with somebody who I really adore, admire, that kind of thing. And then just kind of finally, maybe this answers your question directly of like how many projects to take on. Like thinking like sometimes you'll just be busy if you're taking too much on and not really thinking about where you're going and what you're doing. I know for me, like last year, I stayed like super busy, and I ended up working. I ended up just like working like more than I think I needed to, and kind of burnt out. So I think it's like you also don't know until you're that far in. And now like I sort of like learn over time like what works best for me. It's like I don't think I can do, back to back working like 6 weekends in a row. I need to like practice like making sure I have like the time to recover and like also stay inspired. So like these like three things have really helped me sort of think about that. Like sometimes I'll just take something on because like, yeah, like this will be like a very good way to like survive income wise. It might not be like the most exciting work, but it's like a great client. They can pay me on time, that kind of thing. That's okay to consider. Yeah, I hope that works. I think it's like a lot of trial and error. It's like you kind of know when you've taken too much on, when you've gotten that far in, and you sort of like, I think all humans are basically people who remember and forget. And I do this too, where I forget that like I don't like being busy. Then I overcommit, and then I'm like, oh wait, yeah, that's right, I don't like being busy. So you kind of practice and like learn, and like it's going to be different for everybody. I think that that's like something I wanted to also talk about, like just thinking of this, like it's not going to work. Like your level of busy might be really different from somebody else's. I know for me, like when I first graduated, I had a friend who was freelancing, and he was like, oh yeah, I take on like 6 web clients at once. And I was like, oh, 6, I'll do 6 clients. That's what I should do. And then I did that, and it didn't work. It was like, no, I just have to start with like 2 for right now. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
It sounded like it. That's great. Do you have time for one more question, Allegra? Is that okay?
I do, yes.
Awesome. So this is from an anonymous questioner, and they say, thank you very much for the informative talk. And they say, how do you negotiate prices for freelance work?
Sure. That is a great question to end on. And I'll sort of point out some resources again, and ones that are really, really accessible. Again, like I think that these books are great. When I was first starting out, this left-hand book, this graphic artist pricing guidebook, the one with the target, I turn to that all the time because they cover everything from, I'm doing a billboard and it's in North America and it's going to run for 6 months, or I'm doing a publication, it's half page. Like it will break down in tables, like region, like how much like you should get paid if it's like a national publication, a local publication, that kind of thing. And they also break down terms, which I really like. The second book, this middle one, is from Chutzpah Design. They are a design studio in California. I went to one of their workshops, and this is a really great book. It's really awesome, freelance basics. They talk about things like what's your overhead and thinking about that, and then thinking about like revenue streams. And then finally, this like brutally honest book. I've only read a little bit of it, but I think it's like actually pretty great, and I really look forward to reading more of it. Specifically with pricing, I would really look at Jessica Heish's Dark Art of Pricing. She like has this PDF you can get at her store. It's $15. Please support her. She's really fantastic. She also has this like free 3 thoughts on getting paid. So in this left-hand column on this getting paid is like really great. Like she talks about like what pricing is like and just kind of sort of thinking of that dynamic with clients. Lisa Condon is also somebody I would just recommend. I don't know if she talks about pricing exactly, but she does talk about management and productivity and like turning this into a business. And then finally, just for pricing too, like this is more for salary, like they use AIG and Glassdoor. You can like look at that. And then Graphic Artists Guild also has like a lot of free resources. But what I would say is the most like kind of thinking of pricing is asking your peers and networks. We are so lucky to be living in a time where you can literally reach out to any other illustrator, and pretty much every illustrator like will tell you like, yeah, I got paid for this, or like, yeah, just consider this. Like I've reached out to people I don't know before just to be like, hey, like I'm a first time illustrator doing this kind of mural. What do you think I should charge? I noticed you did something similar. Can you just give me a ballpark? I really appreciate your time. So pricing can be a lot. I think like for me, I would really like focus on your peers and networks and like just reaching out to people. I'll also volunteer this too. Like feel free to reach out to me if you ever need pricing, but most illustrators will be into that. Yeah, and again, like I would go back and like look at this Jessica Heish pricing guide. It's been really helpful for me. Yeah, I hope that helps. I think for me, it's like really relying on like your peers, both like whether it is salary negotiation or like actual rates for project. That's been like very helpful. And like I would also think about too with like project rates, like what do you actually need to sustain the work? So if you have a project that's going to like take like, 100 hours and it's $600, maybe that's not the project for you unless you like want to explore something and it's something fulfilling. That's okay too. So also thinking of like, could your needs get met for that rate too? Is another way of looking at it. I hope that like answers that clearly.
Oh yeah, you gave so many resources there, whether it's books, websites, just general advice. I think there's so many options that people can pick from that. So that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Allegra, this has been so great, and you've been so generous with your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I talked a lot.
It's a lot. Like freelancing contracts is no small topic. Like it's really a lot.
Yeah.
Excellent. So I want to thank everybody for coming to share with us this evening, and especially many, many thanks to Allegra. This was really fantastic. And as I said, we're going to review this recording, and we'll work on some sort of version for future posting. And folks, we'll be in touch with you all at the end of the semester. We do reach out with a web page where the recordings that are available are linked, so that you don't have to be nervous about taking frantic notes or anything like that.
Yeah, but speaking of frantic notes, I also really thank you so much, Ellen, for capturing all these notes and links. I really appreciate it. And I just want to thank everybody again. It meant so much to talk with you. I know I talked a lot. I can always talk a lot. And I'll also just reiterate, if you do need somebody to reach out to talk about pricing or to talk about contracts or to talk about freelance, I'm always happy to do that. I might be a little slow at email right now, but just feel free to keep bothering me. That's okay. I just wanted to thank you again, and thank you for having me, Ellen. It was so good to see you and so nice to do this.
You bet. Absolutely. Thank you for your generosity. Everybody have a beautiful evening, and hopefully we'll see you soon at another event. All right. Bye, everyone.